The semiconductor stocks are dealing with a few headwinds right now. That is a huge part of the puzzle at the moment, given what DeepSeek, that rout that we saw earlier this year, that left a dent in investor confidence. It really injected this uncertainty that we might not see the kind of demand for chips as we have before because there's more efficient models that don't require as many of them. So yes, this news coming out of China had a lot to do with what to expect going forward in terms of demand, but you also have a lot happening here in Washington that's injected a new layer of concerns with regards to how trade policies, tariffs might eventually impact the supply chains for a lot of these big semiconductors.
Okay, well, let's talk micro now with Marvell, the worst performer on a percentage basis in the stocks right now, down more than 18%. We know Amazon is one of the biggest customers. That's according to Bloomberg data, but I honestly have a hard time keeping track of all of these semi firms, Jackie. So just sort of I need a whiteboard, I feel like, but remind us what Marvell's core business is and how it relates to AI and why shares are down so much.
It's a chip maker, and you're absolutely right. It has a broad base of customers, but among them are those in the AI space. So it's exposed, which is why you're seeing kind of this overreaction to what's going on in China. This trade tariff uncertainty really offset a lot of the gains that you think you'd be seeing after a pretty good earnings report. Similar story for Broadcom later today. It's expected to post pretty solid earnings on the back of strong demand, but we're going to see how investors eventually react, because this meeting next week between President Trump and some chip makers like Qualcomm, Intel, HP is really going to kind of give us a barometer for how the manufacturers are thinking about their exposure. We're not sure what might come out of it. HP so far is the only company to have confirmed that meeting is in place. But given after what we've seen this week, a lot is riding on sentiment based off of what happens then.
Well, you mentioned sentiment, right? And this one is a big beneficiary of the AI computing build out. And let's remind everybody what this company does. And I'm reading from the Bloomberg story because I'm not a chip expert, but like you are and our Ian King is. But it basically provides chip design services. So those major tech customers, it helps them develop their own data center semiconductors, the hyperscalers, so the Amazons and the like, those big players who order a lot of stuff. So I don't know, like, what do we read into this? The hyperscalers backing off, or I don't know, where do we go with this in terms of the news from Marvell?
The hyperscalers are not backing off. As we saw earlier last month, they're spending. And if anything, they're ramping up that spending. Every player here across the ecosystem is poised to benefit from that, whether you're making these chip designs or you're actually manufacturing or you're further down the supply chain providing some of those extra parts, servers, for example. We're seeing kind of the broader ecosystem lifted when you look at the fundamentals. But again, a lot of this is riding on what happens here in Washington. And that's not something that plays out over the next couple weeks. Obviously, President Trump has changed his mind a couple of times. So this could be uncertainty that's baked into the sector over the next coming year. That's a lot for investors to digest. And so we might see bigger swings and, less impressed sentiment when it comes to really strong earnings.
We could perhaps get a narrative shift when it comes to a company reporting after the bell today, a big one, Broadcom. Investors are certainly hoping that those earnings will shift the focus back to the bright spot of heavy spending on AI. Shares down close to 6% right now. Is it likely that this changes the narrative and says, hey, everybody stop freaking out?
I don't think so. I think Marvell was a great sign that, no matter how strong your fundamentals are, that your demand picture looks strong, that your earnings are actually flowing through the bottom line. This, Broadcom is a big player in the space, but it's not clear that that can really offset a lot of the deeper concerns that are underlying some of this rout that we're seeing in chips broadly. But what we could see is perhaps how kind of going into next week with some of these conversations around manufacturing and U.S. policy, it could provide some confidence that at least the foundation is strong. Of course, that's if they deliver on those results.
Hey, real quickly, just got about 30 seconds. You mentioned, teased the meeting next week among tech leaders in D.C. Who's going to be there quickly, and what's top of mind for all of them? Is it just tariffs?
So far, Qualcomm, HP, Intel are the biggest, player when it comes to domestic manufacturing. It's so far only HP has actually confirmed that, but Bloomberg sources tell us that the other players will be there as well. Manufacturing, trade policy is the top priority on the agenda. But that's as if nothing else happens in between now and then. Obviously, they want to know, is the U.S. committed to boosting domestic manufacturing, how their supply chains will ultimately be affected by U.S. policy.